This is the Nvidia RTX 5070 Ti, and it's launching February the 20th, 2025 for a US MSRP of 700 and... Excuse me, one second, I'm getting a message. What? What do you mean my script's wrong? What do you mean it's not $750? Nvidia said the 5070 Ti would be $750. Well, yeah, of course I believed them. I mean, that's what they said. Really? You gotta laugh at me? Really? You know, all joking aside, this GPU generation honestly has been a little bit rough, to say the least. Am I right? It's like every day we wake up and there's another new problem going on with these cards, and kind of makes you wonder, when will all the good stuff start? Well, to add fuel to the fire, Nvidia, for whatever reason, decided not to make a Founders Edition model of the 5070 Ti. So that means your only options are all the board partners. Now, that's not really a bad thing in and of itself, but everybody knows board partners typically run a little more expensive than Nvidia's MSRP. And so people are worried if they're going to be able to get a card for the MSRP. Well, technically speaking, at the launch of the 5070 Ti, you could get a few models of the 5070 Ti for the MSRP of $750. Asus, for example, had one for $750. And even at the time of this filming, the card is still listed at that price, even though it is sold out. Now, with that being said, there are articles online suggesting this is a limited run, meaning that eventually all of these $750 cards will become more expensive. I don't know if that's true. And if it is true, I don't know when it will happen. And I don't know how much the cards will increase by. What I do know is that I review GPUs here on this channel and other PC hardware. And for better or worse, like it or not, the 5070 Ti is a thing. It exists, it's here, and it needs to be reviewed. With that in mind, today we're taking a look at the 5070 Ti, and not just any 5070 Ti, but the Asus TUF Gaming OC 5070 Ti. Yes, Asus did send this out to me for review. However, all thoughts and opinions are my own. And pricing aside, this card actually does have a few redeeming qualities, like overclocking, for example. This card is an overclocking beast. And yes, we're going to get into that here in just a moment. I just released a full video reviewing the ROG Astro 5080. I did not have the same amount of time with the 5070 Ti that I did with the 5080. Therefore, this review will not be as long as the 5080 review. With that being said, this video will be a lot more straightforward. If there is something you wanted to see me test and I did not test it, let me know in the comment section below, and I will see about trying to do a follow-up content piece to address that. Now, with all that being said, let's talk about what you can expect from today's video. First of all, I have taken the time to add chapters to this video for your convenience. You are welcome to skip around to the sections that are most interesting to you. We will be doing an unboxing of the card. We will follow that up with the specifications of the card. This will be divided into two sections, the Nvidia specifications and the Asus specifications. After that, we'll do a couple of synthetic benchmarks, then we'll do the gaming benchmarks, and then we'll talk about the pricing and my overall final thoughts. See? Simple and straightforward. Let's get into it. Okay, so what do you get in the box? Well, obviously you're going to get the GPU itself, the Asus TUF Gaming RTX 5070 Ti. In addition to that, you get one setup manual, you get a graphics card holder, you get a Velcro hook and loop, you get a tough magnet, you get a certificate of reliability, you get a thank you card, and of course, you will have a 1 to 3 adapter cable that will be used to power the GPU. And now we need to switch over and talk about the specifications of the card. Again, this will be divided into two sections. There will be the Nvidia section and there will be the AIC or add-in card partner section, which in this case will be Asus. Fair warning, this chapter may be a little bit longer and some of the points might sound a little bit like marketing material or marketing gibberish, but the way I look at it is simply this. If you choose to buy the card, you are paying for these supposed features, and a lot of these features can be tested with gaming benchmarks and synthetic benchmarks and things of that nature. And so it is important to understand what these companies are claiming to offer for your money, and the only way to really validate that is to understand what they're saying and then put it to the test. So let's get into it. On the screen is the official Nvidia specifications for the RTX 5070 Ti, and you can see it compared to the 4070 Ti Super and the 4070 Ti. I will not cover those two cards, but they are there for your reference. The 5070 Ti Ti has 8,960 CUDA cores, 5th generation Tensor cores with 1,406 AI tops, 4th generation ray tracing cores with 133 T-flops. The base clock speed is 2.3 gigahertz and the boost clock speed is 2.45 gigahertz. The memory configuration will be the same on every 5070 Ti regardless of who the card is coming from. And that configuration is 16 gigabytes of GDDR7 memory with a 256-bit bus width. And finally, the TGP for the 5070 Ti is 300 watts. Now let's switch over and talk about the Asus specifications. Out of the box, this card is already going to clock higher than the default spec from Nvidia. This is an overclocked model, and so it has an OC mode that will boost to 2610 megahertz and a default mode that will boost to 2452 megahertz. But I promise you, this card can go far beyond that, and we will talk more about that later in the video. The TUF Gaming 5070 Ti features 3 axial tech fans, and the 2 outer fans spin counterclockwise while the inner fan spins clockwise. Asus is claiming that this will help to reduce turbulence. All 3 fans will stop spinning when the GPU temperatures fall below 50°, and all 3 fans will start spinning again once the temperatures rise above 55°. All the fans are using dual ball bearings, which claim to have a rated lifespan of 80,000 hours. The TUF Gaming 5070 Ti features an aluminum backplate with a dedicated ventilation section. Asus has specified the card as a 3.6 slot card. However, your average gamer would just call that a 4-slot card. And by the way, here are the official dimensions of the TUF Gaming 5070 Ti. In terms of the I/O on the card, it features 2 HDMI 2.1B ports and 3 DisplayPort 2.1B ports, and the bracket around these ports is using 304 stainless steel. The TUF Gaming 5070 Ti does offer minimal RGB lighting. The TUF Gaming logo lights up on the right side of the card. On this year's model, they decided to add 4 more small RGB lights to give the logo an extra pop. Personally, I would prefer just to have the logo light up, but let me know what you think in the comment section down below. The TUF Gaming 5070 Ti does feature a dual BIOS. There is a P mode that stands for performance mode, and there is a Q mode that stands for quiet mode. The GPU will pull 300 watts in both modes. It does not matter. The main difference here is that the performance mode will run colder than the quiet mode, but obviously the Q mode will be quieter than the performance mode. By default, the card is set to performance mode out of the box. Also, it's worth noting, if you do not plug in your 12-volt high-power connector properly, you will see a red LED light on the TUF Gaming OC 5070 Ti, and you will see this light if you don't plug in the cable at all, or if the cable is only partially plugged in. Once the light goes away, you know you have made a proper connection. And finally, Asus is setting expectations very high for thermal performance because they are claiming that they have an exclusive manufacturing process called max contact design, and the short version of this is that it should result in lowering temperatures by up to 2°. And on top of that, instead of using traditional thermal paste, they are using a GPU phase change thermal pad, and this is supposed to make better contact with the GPU die. Okay, all of that is cool and all, but it doesn't actually matter if it doesn't translate to real world performance. So we're about to go in and look at synthetic benchmarks, and then we'll go into gaming benchmarks. Okay, so the TUF Gaming 5070 Ti is currently in performance mode, and I loaded up FurMark because I wanted to see a stress test on the card. And as you can see, we max out around 65.3C, and the max wattage pulled in here is 300 watts. And if we look at the fan speed, we can see that we max out at 58%, or just a little above 1600 RPM. Okay, the card is now in Q mode or quiet mode. We can see the max temperature here has now increased as expected to 65.8C. We can see the max wattage here is also 300 watts. The max fan percentage is only 39%, and the RPM is just a hair above 1000 RPM. Next up, I ran the benchmark for Affinity Photo. I compared the 5070 Ti to a 4070 Ti, and as you can see, the 5070 Ti is faster. The main score we care about is the single GPU raster score. Before we move forward and talk about the gaming benchmarks, I want to briefly touch base on what we just saw. So the Affinity Photo test is linear, and really what we learned there is that the 5070 Ti is faster than the 4070 Ti, and really that's not a surprise because that should be the case. Now, looking at the FurMark testing, however, we can see that A lot of the things Asus was claiming is actually correct, especially around that dual BIOS. Asus said you can use the Q mode or the P mode. Either way, you should pull in 300 watts. We confirmed that to be true. Asus said the P mode should run colder than the Q mode. And obviously the Q mode should be a quieter operation. And we confirmed that to also be true because the fan RPM was noticeably lower when compared to the performance mode. So the FurMark testing really helped us to confirm a lot of things. And now it's time to move on and talk about the gaming benchmarks, and we need to talk about all the hardware being used. Let me start with the GPUs because we have two of them. Obviously, we're going to be testing the Asus TUF Gaming RTX 5070 Ti, but what are we comparing it to? Well, I did just mention a 4070 Ti. I do not own a 4070 Ti, but my friend Sam does. This is the Zotac Trinity OC RTX 4070 Ti. My friend Sam allowed me to borrow it. Thank you, Sam. I really do appreciate it. Massive shout out to you. And I'm excited to see how the 5070 Ti compares to the 4070 Ti. But now let's talk about all the other hardware being used for the gaming benchmarks. For the motherboard, we have the ROG Strix B850-A gaming Wi-Fi. For the CPU, we have the AMD Ryzen 9800X 3D. For the RAM, I'm using a 32GB kit of DDR5 Patriot Viper gaming memory clocked at 6400 MTs. And for the power supply, I'm using an Asus TUF Gaming 1000 watt 80 plus gold PSU. This is the ATX 3.1 model, not the 3.0 model, so this is the latest edition. Asus did send this out along with the GPU for testing. And finally, for the CPU cooler, I am using the Cooler Master 360 Atmos. And finally, all of this hardware was set up on an open air test bench. It may not look the greatest, but it absolutely works. You know, I'm sitting here editing the video and I realize I keep calling this thing the TUF Gaming 5070 Ti. Technically, that's not correct. It's actually called the TUF Gaming OC 5070 Ti. And yes, it does matter because there are two models that you can buy on the shelf and they're about $20 apart. Obviously, the OC model will cost the extra money. But yeah, there's two models out there. There is actually a TUF Gaming non-OC model. But this is the OC model. Now, speaking of OC, let's actually get into overclocking because we are about to get into gaming benchmarks. But here's the thing. Out of the box, your default experience will be this card in performance mode. And that's exactly how I tested all of my benchmarks. But I also realized this card is phenomenal at overclocking. And I mean, absolutely phenomenal. And I really only discovered that after I got all my initial benchmarks done. And so now I'm kind of wishing I did all my benchmarks with the overclock. But anyway, we're going to talk briefly about the overclocking. Okay, things to note. Out of the box, the card will only reach up to about 300 watts. And that's if you're doing a stress test like FurMark or Speedway or something like that. However, in gaming, you're usually not going to get that high. An exception might be CyberPunk with the ray tracing ultra mode with no DLSS or anything like that. But the point I want to make here is that you can actually increase the power limit on this card by about 10%, and you can bump it all the way up to 330 watts. And you can do that in the Asus software called GPU Tweak 3. All you have to do is move the slider all the way over to the right, and boom, you have the extra performance. And now once that's done, you can go over to the right and you can max out the sliders for the GPU core clock speed and the memory speed. Don't worry, by default, Asus has put a limit there, and whenever you max it out, that is a relatively safe limit that they have predetermined for the card, to where you can get the extra performance and not crash the card basically. However, there's a trick. If you go to the settings menu, there is a checkbox. Check it. It is called Enhance Overclocking Range. Make sure you hit save, and then here's the trick. Found this out the hard way. Restart the application. Close it all the way down, restart it, then go in and apply your changes. If you don't restart it and if you just start overclocking, it says it works, but then once you get into the game, you end up with something crazy like 1800 megahertz. It's some type of bug. It does require you to restart the application. Make sure you do that. But once you do that, the fun really begins. I was able to overclock the TUF Gaming OC 5070 Ti all the way up to 3300 megahertz, 3.3 gigahertz. Yes, you heard that right. Also, please take a moment to notice that even on the extreme preset at native 4K with this overclock, the temperatures are between 53 and 54 C. And maybe this is where we see some of those marketing claims about the cooling technologies coming into play and actually making a difference here. I did a full run in Call of Duty Black Ops 6 with this speed with no crashes. And I completed an entire Time Spy run with this as well with no crashes. Honestly, I didn't even push the Astral this far. To be fair, I've learned a few more tricks since that video, and so I might go back and try it. With that being said, the 5070 Ti, specifically this model from Asus, I can confirm is an overclocking beast. It's not just me. I actually saw a video by Centric. He basically said the exact same thing and came up with very similar results. I think I was able to clock a little higher, but that's besides the point. I'm joking. It's all fun and games. You know, GPUs used to be fun, and they should be fun. And doing stuff like this, it is fun. And I know it's not fun for a lot of people right now in the market and the way things are going down, but I do hope things will eventually get better. And if and when they do get better, it's good to know that, you know, there are cards like this that have a lot of headroom out of the box, which is pretty cool actually. But speaking of which, it is time to talk about the official gaming benchmarks, talk about pricing and my final thoughts, and we'll get out of here. Now for the gaming benchmarks, we're going head to head with a 4070 Ti, and I ran everything at 1440p. Yes, the 5070 Ti can definitely run some games at 4K. However, I think it's probably best positioned for high refresh rate 1440p gaming. And even if you disagree and it can go higher, the 4070 Ti was definitely a 1440p card. And so testing that card at 4K wouldn't really be a fair comparison. So I'm sticking to 1440p, 4070 Ti versus 5070 Ti. Here we go. Okay, starting off with Call of Duty Black Ops 6. This is native 1440p on the Ultra preset. The 4070 Ti is coming in with an average of around 77 to 78 FPS, but the 5070 Ti has an average of 148 FPS. Also, the 5070 Ti is running colder, it's clocking higher, and for some reason, I have no idea why, it's actually pulling in less power pretty much through this entire benchmark. Definitely a solid win here for the 5070 Ti. Next up is Forza Horizon 5, native 1440p. This is the extreme preset and it does include ray tracing. Keep in mind, Forza is not the most demanding game to run, so the 4070 Ti here is still going to look really good. But the question is really, how much better is the 5070 Ti? Well, right off the bat, we do have the 5070 Ti pulling in more power, but while it's doing that, it's finding a way to stay colder than the 4070 Ti. Looking at the average frame rate, the 4070 Ti has about 154 FPS compared to the 5070 Ti's 189 FPS. Now, when we look at the 1% lows, that's where things get a little bit more interesting because you have about a 23 frame difference there in favor, obviously, to the 5070 Ti. While the 4070 Ti is still more than playable in Forza Horizon 5, you can definitely see the improvement with the 5070 Ti in pretty much every measurable category here. Okay, next up we have Spider-Man 2. Please understand this game does have a few issues on PC and they are still patching it, but I know there are people who want to see these benchmarks. Okay, on the left is the 4070 Ti, on the right is the 5070 Ti. As you can see, the 5070 Ti is pulling in about 114 to 115 FPS. Meanwhile, the 4070 Ti is averaging about 87 to 88 FPS. The interesting part here, of course, is the 1% lows because they're not great at all. Okay, so the 1% lows here look absolutely horrible for both cards. They look even worse for the 5070 Ti, but that's also because I think maybe something's not registering properly. Closer to the end of the benchmark, the 1% lows do increase to the 40s, very similarly to the 4070 Ti. But let's not kid ourselves, 41, 42 FPS and the 1% lows, it's nothing to be happy with. Looking at all the other specs, once again, 5070 Ti is winning in all the other categories. Pulling in more power, but staying colder, it's clocking higher. And even though it's the same settings, it's able to utilize more VRAM because it has more VRAM to utilize. Next up is Avowed 1440p Epic preset. On the left is a 4070 Ti, and as you can see, it is already stuttering and struggling pretty badly here. Somehow it's pulling in more power than the 5070 Ti. It's running noticeably hotter than the 5070 Ti. You're talking by 10 to 12C. The 1% lows are around 32 to 33 FPS, and as you can see, it's a complete stutter fest, and the average frame rate is only around 47 FPS. Meanwhile, when you look at the 5070 Ti, that is clearly a better gaming experience all the way around, pulling in less power, running colder, higher 1% lows, higher average frame rates. And for the final benchmark, we have CyberPunk 2077, Phantom Liberty, and this is everything maxed out at 1440p. This is the overdrive mode, so it has ray tracing, path tracing, maxed out graphics, DLSS set to quality, frame generation enabled for 4070 Ti, multi-frame generation X4 mode enabled for the 5070 Ti, Ti, and we are using ray reconstruction and the new transformer model. Wow, that was a lot to say. I think you can understand why I did not fit it all on the screen. I thought it would be interesting to see what the cards could offer whenever you enable all the bells and whistles using all the marketing claims. And as you can see, for the most part, the 5070 Ti does seem to be performing better in pretty much every category, except for some reason the 1% lows. Although the 1% lows are not exactly great on the 4070 Ti either. But then to be fair, none of these frame rates are really that accurate considering how we are using AI generated frames here. But outside of that, the 5070 Ti is clocking higher, running colder, and even if they are fake frames, the overall motion fluidity will be smoother with the 5070 Ti over something like the 4070 Ti in CyberPunk 2077. Okay, look, it's time to talk about pricing, and unfortunately it's not good. Chances are you have probably already seen the prices, but if you haven't, brace yourself. The official MSRP of the Asus TUF Gaming OC RTX 5070 Ti is $1,000. Yes, that is official. Unfortunately, Asus is not an outlier here. All the board partners have ridiculous prices for their 5070 Ti's. $900, $1,000, it's all over the board. And yes, there were a few models at $750 at launch, but they're all sold out. I'm not sure if they're coming back. And like I said before, people are claiming that that was a promotional price, and then all of those cards will go up in price as well. The short version is this: the card's $1,000. The competitors of the card are around the same price. None of the prices are great. I don't like the prices. I don't support the prices. I have friends, I have family that I've been trying to get into the PC hobby for the last couple of years. Every year it gets harder, not easier. Prices seem to do nothing but go up. It's kind of ridiculous. In fact, it is ridiculous where your 5070 Ti model, which is supposed to be a mid-range card, is selling for $1,000. It's a lot of money. It is. But on the flip side, I also kind of want to put a few things into perspective. And no, this is not me shilling or defending. Just don't even bother with that. We do have a new president here in North America that has implemented tariffs. Tariffs are real and they do have impacts, and they are impacting pricing. How much? That is debatable. I don't know. Okay. But there is an impact there. Remember this guy, the 4070 Ti, the Zotac Trinity OC? Yeah, I was with my buddy Sam at Micro Center when he purchased this, and he paid $850 for this card. You just saw the performance of this card. You saw the stuttering. You saw how bad it was performing. So let that sink in for a second. 2 years ago, my buddy paid $850 for this card. It has 12 gigabytes of VRAM. And as you saw today, it did not age well at all. And so when you take a step back and put it into perspective and you say, okay, look, I can pay somewhere in the ballpark of about $900. And yes, that is more expensive than this card right here, but it is a noticeably better card. Also, editor's note here, and I totally forgot to mention this in the video, but the reason why I didn't show any overclocking results for the 4070 Ti is simply because this card is awful at overclocking. I could not get the card to even be stable with a simple plus 200 on the core clock. This card has almost no room in it for extra performance at all whatsoever. Basically the exact opposite of what you just saw with the TUF Gaming OC 5070 Ti. Okay, really bad cut, and I do apologize for that. I had finished filming this section, turned off the lights, realized I didn't really say what I needed to say here. So let me condense it, okay? Number one, prices are bad. You know it, I know it, we all know it. Number two, there's only two ways this changes. Either AMD and or Intel step up and give us adequate competition to drive prices down with Nvidia, or everyone who doesn't want to pay these prices boycott. That's really the only two options here, right? Now, with that being said, let's talk about who should probably get a 5070 Ti or a 50 series card in general. If you have a 40 series card, I honestly believe you should stay where you are. Even with a 4070 Ti and how bad it struggled tonight in some games, those games have settings that can be turned down, and you can do things to get the game to be more playable on that card, right? Stay where you are, save the money. However, if you have a 3070 Ti or something older than all of that, then you will see a really nice performance uplift. You just have to pay for it. 3070 to a 5070 Ti is a 49% performance increase according to techpowerup.com. 3070 Ti to a 5070 Ti is a 45% performance increase. With all that being said, if you consider those cards being in 2020, 2021, well, you probably didn't really pay MSRP for those cards. You probably paid over MSRP and likely got a lot closer to what you would pay today for a 5070 Ti. My final thought on this card specifically, the 5070 Ti Asus TUF Gaming OC. Overall, I think if you buy this card or get it somehow in the future, I don't think you're going to be disappointed with the build quality. The build quality is absolutely amazing on this thing. Asus didn't cheap out on build material at all. And I think you're going to be very impressed with the overclocking capabilities. I know I was. I'm still impressed impressed with how well this card overclocks. It is truly an overclocking beast. With that being said, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If I missed something, I'm sorry. Okay, it's been a long video. I'm getting out of here. Like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you in the comment section below. And until next time, E-Rock out.